Glad you could join us. My name is Kim Porter. I'm the Executive Director of Be a Part of the Conversation. Also with me tonight is my colleague, Bob Lamb. He is our Director of Operations and Programs. Really happy to have you for this conversation. This is the first time that we've discussed disordered eating, and so I'm really glad that we're doing this, especially with the folks that we have with us tonight. Really important topic. Thank you very much to our community partner who's sponsoring this event. This is the Chester County Department of Drug and Alcohol Services. The folks who are with us are actually located in Chester County in a couple of locations. I'll tell you more about them in a moment. We'll allow some time at the end of this program for Q&A. We should have ample time to discuss. You're going to hear from two presenters who I'll introduce in just a moment. But we want to let you know that while we are recording this program, any questions that you ask will be edited out. So in the recording, we will not see your face, your name, we won't hear your voice, so that will all be edited out. But we do want to encourage those questions because that's why you're here, right? We want to have a conversation. We want to hear from you. So please think about some questions you have, drop them in the chat at any time. Bob and I will keep an eye on those questions and moderate a Q&A toward the end of our program. And thank you to those of you who asked some questions ahead of time. It really does help us to get a sense of what folks are looking for when they attend this program. And at the end of the program tonight, you'll receive a pop-up on your window that says, please survey, or here's a link for the survey. So we ask you to just take a moment to complete that. It really does help us to learn if this was helpful to you, what other subjects you'd like to hear from us, hear about from us in the future. So please do take just a moment to complete that survey, even if you've responded to our surveys in the past. We really do love to hear from you. So thank you for that in advance. And I read that about the survey. All right, we have some programs coming up that I wanted to make sure you knew about. We have a lot on our calendar, but just a few that I thought you'd be interested in. On February 6th, we'll be talking about 21st century teens. So this will be looking at various process addictions, such as technology, social media, sports betting, gaming, gambling, eating, a little bit of eating disorder, also exercise and shopping and all sorts of things that can really be challenging for young people in this world of, as Anna Lemke, one of my favorites, calls it a dopamine-rich environment. We have so much around us that gives us instant gratification. So when you're a young person looking for some kind of escape, there are ample opportunities for that. So we'll talk about how that can progress into some challenging behaviors. And then we have a program that we love this film. There's a film called Screenagers that came out years ago. This is the third version of this, or the third production from this group. There's a pediatrician and some other filmmakers who got together and put together this really great film. This one is called Under the Influence. And we've had a couple of in-person showings, and we thought, let's go ahead and stream it online and invite people to watch it virtually. So you can actually stream this program at this film at no charge for 2 weeks from February 20th through March 5th. And you'll have to register to do that. So when you go on our website, and I'll put that link in the chat for you in a moment, you can register to stream it online. And then we're going to have a panel discussion on February 29th. So there'll be time to watch it before that. If people want to rewatch it after that, there's still time for that. But on February 29th online, we'll have like a 1-hour panel discussion with a clinician, a prevention specialist, and with an educator to talk about Under the Influence. So it's a really terrific film. I strongly encourage you to check it out. It's not easy to find free showings or even any showings in fact, so please take advantage of this opportunity. Another program we have coming up, this one will be on Zoom on February 21st, called Preparing Your Child to Launch. So looking at that emerging adult and how we as family members, educators, parents, can best prepare them to be independent and give them those wings. And then we have a program on siblings. So this would be siblings who are impacted by someone's substance use disorder. So if I were a sibling, we would be talking about my sibling who has an addiction to drugs or alcohol or other behaviors. So that will be online again, February 27th. That's a Tuesday evening from 7 to 8:30 p.m. And we're going to have some professionals and some people who have some lived experience. So hope you'll join us for that. Such an important topic because siblings are often kind of left in the shadows when their other sibling is getting a lot of maybe negative attention, but lots and lots of attention and worry and all that kind of stuff. So hope you'll join us. Finally, we have another program, this one in person at the Great Valley School District Administration Building. On March 12th, we'll be talking about cannabis and the challenges that this presents, particularly with young people. So there is this kind of new normal out there. Oh, this is healthful. It might be for anxiety. It might be for this. And some of these things are actually not quite accurate. And so we're going to just try to make sure that we have some really clear information about what cannabis looks like today, ways that it's administered, what some of the challenges might be, and how we can best support young people in making some really good, healthy choices for whatever it is that's driving them to use cannabis more and more. So again, more programs like this on our calendar, on our website. You can find that link right there. Bob's going to put some of these links in the chat, and I'll put in the stuff about screenagers. We have a YouTube channel that has about 136 programs on it right now. So programs like tonight's are recorded and you can find them there. This will take a couple of days to process if you want to share it with anyone. So we'll have it posted on our YouTube channel definitely by the end of the week. But I also want to let you know about some meetings that we have that take place all year long, 5 days of the week. We have parent partnership meetings that are for parents like me. I'm a parent of someone who is in recovery, and we really need, whether our child is in recovery or still struggling with substance use, we need each other. So this would be similar to Al-Anon or Nar-Anon meetings for family members. We love those. They're wonderful. Difference is this is not a 12-step program, and we are all parents, and we have crosstalk and things like that. So different dynamic, parents, grandparents, and guardians, basically, anyone who's loving a child of any age who struggled with substance use. And you can go to our website to find meetings here. There are 21 meetings every week. About half of them are on Zoom, about half are in person. You can click on these buttons to get the details about the location if it's in person, or the Zoom link, or an email to connect to somebody. We'll give you the Zoom link if it's online. We also have a family recovery course that we're very proud of. It's a wonderful opportunity to learn about addiction. No charge to attend anything that I've mentioned to you, including the family recovery course. The course is capped at 12 individuals. It really helps us to learn about what happened to our loved one who has a substance use disorder, what happened to our family, and how we can heal as family members. So encourage you to check that out as well. So I'm really happy to introduce you to our speakers this evening. Laura and Haley are both with the Center for Families. Laura Whitman has nearly 20 years of experience in the mental health care field. Before joining the Center for Families team, she founded and facilitated a weekly outpatient group examining the intersection of identity, body image, sexuality, gender, and disordered eating. Haley Adessa is really interested in empowering young people to recognize their own worth and value as the biggest reward of her work. Haley has also worked as a therapist at a group practice and at a residential eating disorders treatment program for adolescent girls and women. So glad that you're both with us, and I'll turn it over to, who's going first? Laura?
Yeah, I will just quickly say I cannot speak highly enough of everything you just shared in terms of supports and resources for families, and it's amazing to see the work you are all doing. Definitely something I know we will continue to pass on to the families we work with. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so as Kim said, my name is Laura Whitman. I currently serve as a clinical supervisor at Center for Families, and it's the Nourish program. We just recently opened in Westchester, and our focus is on supporting adolescents with general mental health, but also with that intersection of looking at the relationship we have with food and body, and how sometimes that can really be a major factor for our clients in all different ways. And it's become a very focal point where we are supporting our kids and our families in both areas. My colleague Haley is one of the co-founders as well, and one of our primary therapists there. Both of us have significant histories in working with eating disorders, both in higher levels of care, like the PHP program we're a part of now, as well as residential and outpatient. But we're really excited to be with you today. As Kim said, other areas that I have on our trauma, as well as supporting our LGBT population. So I will let Haley jump in while I am getting ready to share our screen.
Yes, just a hello on my end. Thank you so much for having me today. As Laura shared, I have been lucky enough to be a part of creating the Nourish program for Center for Families, really in mind with all the experience that Laura and I are bringing to the table, and knowing that there is a population of our adolescents that were often getting missed or shuffled around from program to program, and really leaning into understanding them more holistically. So really excited that it was an opportunity we were able to create, and excited to be here today to talk a little bit more about and around eating disorders and disordered eating and helping along the way. Um, so that's me. Um, I can't see it anymore, Laura, so I'm going to try and adjust my screen really quick. Okay.
You're good. All right, so I am going to get us all started. Today, we are going to be talking specifically about really trying to challenge a lot of the myths and unknown information and taboos around eating disorders, disordered eating, and why this is such an important topic for us to be discussing with all of you, about your loved ones, about your children, the kids you're caregiving for, but just to really open up conversation in general, because it is often something we don't have a lot of comfort talking about. So to get us started today, one of the first things we have to be willing to do is slow down. And to do that, we have to recognize that when we are talking about our loved ones and their relationship with food and their relationship with their body, we have to also be willing to say, hey, you know what? We have that same thing. We have our own bodies, which means we have a relationship with it, whether we pay attention to it or not. And same with food. And so to do that, to just get us started, I am going to ask us to participate in just a few questions. I'm going to use a interactive tool. So when I flip the slide, you are going to have the opportunity to use your phone to use the code to jump in and answer the question, or you can type in the website below and you'll be able to join and answer that way. All your responses will be anonymous and it'll show us on screen what people are saying. And the whole point of this is we're not looking to judge, we're curious, and to just have an opportunity to see where we are as a group, because this is definitely a topic that brings in a lot of different feelings and a lot of different emotions. So our first question is, if you could use one word to describe the relationship you have with food, what would that be? And again, you can scan the code or go onto the website and do it that way. Whatever that first thought that pops into your mind. Let's see if we can get some of those. Healthy. That's wonderful. Enjoy. Not great. Fuel. Tricky. It's a good one. Complicated. Extreme. I so appreciate that. Work in progress. Oh, nice. Previous sleep disorder. Thank you for sharing. Approved finally. Wonderful. Okay. Okay. Now that you've got the idea, we're going to shift to our next question. Same thing. Inconsistent. Okay. Next question. Similar. Use one word to describe the relationship you have with your body. Like hate, critical, thankful, complicated, proud, seesaw, complicated, avoidant, disgusted, proud. All right. And the last question for right now. How often do you compare yourself to other people? Okay. All right. Thank you so much for taking the time to answer these questions. They may seem simple, but based on just the words we've received and just the range of them tells us that these are not simple topics. These are not simple experiences. And I would say that the range and some of the language that you all shared is a lot of what we see when we ask our adolescents these questions. Right. So if we as adults are sitting here saying, hey, sometimes this is a really complicated relationship, or I've really had to work at it, or, I'm feeling pretty good. You can imagine then for an adolescent who has way less lived experience and resources to pull from, that this can be pretty complicated for them as well. So one thing we will ask you to keep in mind tonight throughout this conversation and moving forward, whenever you're thinking about your loved one, is, where am I in that same relationship? And how is that potentially supporting my loved one, impacting my loved one? Again, not judging, just being willing to slow down and be reflective. Okay. Oh, just jumped really ahead. So we need to start our conversation with a little bit of looking at the specifics of what we're talking about tonight. So what are the differences between disordered eating and eating disorders? And how do we know what we're looking at when we see things? When do we know to be concerned? So I'm going to let Haley take over from here and just let me know when to click.
Well, first, I just want to note on the bottom of this slide that we have here, the disordered eating disorder at the very bottom here. You might see throughout some of the slides that we use the abbreviations of DE and ED. So we're just looking at disordered eating disorder. So just in case you are wondering, Laura, you can flip. So there's a lot of content on the screen. Really, we just want to give an overview around some of the kind of like common eating disorders that we would see in our experience. And I would actually also like to note here, one of the ones that we did not include was our other specified feeding and eating disorder, which tends to be, we can say kind of like the catch-all diagnosis. What we often see, especially in our adolescents, is that they aren't fitting every criteria marker to receive a diagnosis of like an anorexia or a binge eating disorder. But what we're actually seeing is that there's a range of different symptoms that they are exhibiting, which pushes them into that other specified as opposed to one of our more categorical eating disorders. But just to review a little bit here, our anorexia nervosa, and I would say anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating disorder even are some of the more common eating disorders that you'd see more stereotypically. I think there's a lot more representation of those particular ones. So you probably have a knowledge base in some of what this looks like already. ARFID, or avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, is one that is more surgent, I would say. It's definitely coming up more frequently, but definitely less research and recognition at this point in time. So our anorexia is our refusal to eat certain types of food. It is a restrictive disorder in nature. Oftentimes you would see an adolescent reporting lack of feeling hungry or avoidant of meal times, lack of awareness to hunger cues. Oftentimes with most eating disorders, but particularly in an anorexia client, you might notice that there is just generally a disconnect and awareness of the mind-body experience. And it does include a body or weight shape focus. So you might notice your adolescent endorsing a lot more body dissatisfaction, which we'll talk about a little bit later here, or really paying attention to weight and shape, spending a lot of time maybe looking in reflective surfaces, paying a lot of attention to the way the clothes are fitting, and just generally having a distorted view of their body weight or shape. In bulimia nervosa, there is the, other side of things where we're seeing the purging happen. And when we say purging, oftentimes we think about the sort of like self-induced vomiting, but there are a lot of ways in which an adolescent or any person experiencing bulimia nervosa might engage in purging practices. A lot of times we'll see this, particularly in adolescents, also manifesting as an overexercise. So if you notice an adolescent who is really engaging in excessive exercise, going above and beyond, something to pay attention to. Oftentimes you'll see them gravitating toward different like fad diets or practices, probably things that they're picking up on TikTok or Instagram, but things that they can do to compensate for eating. Bulimia nervosa does have a binge cycle involved in this. So with a restrictive nature, a binge might happen, and then we'll notice that the purge occurs. Again, skipping meals, smaller portions, that is a part of this experience too. And like anorexia nervosa, there is a body or weight shape focus to this. So similarly to an anorexia nervosa, there will be that focus on paying attention to their size, paying attention to clothes and fit, and overall distorted sense of weight and shape view. In our binge eating disorder, this is where we would see an adolescent who is eating a larger amount of food than is considered quote unquote normal. So probably more food than we would sit down and normally engage in eating. There is usually a pattern of restriction that occurs before a binge. It is an effort to restrict themselves from engaging with a particular food that they might binge with. Oftentimes, someone struggling with binge eating disorder will have foods that they gravitate towards and will use for binge. So they'll prevent themselves from engaging in that. And then we'll see that restrictive nature. Again, a disconnect from hunger and fullness cues, just really generally struggling with the mind-body connection again. Body or weight shape focus can occur in this. A lot of body dissatisfaction again, and overall distortion in weight and shape. So you'll see a commonality between the three that I had just been speaking about with the distortion in body, weight, and shape. Those are really, I would say, more observed clues that you could be paying attention to with your adolescents, noticing if there's the general body dissatisfaction, or if they start talking more about their physical presence or what they look like, comparison, hearing those sorts of things from them, all signals that we want to be paying attention to. And then our last here, the avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. You'll probably hear it called ARFID more because that is a mouthful of a title. Is kind of our outlier. I think I described it to Laura before as kind of like the like long lost cousin, if you will. Doesn't fit a lot of our stereotypes with our eating disorders that we just described. And again, it needs definitely more research behind it, but we're seeing it occur more and more frequently in our adolescent population. This is a disorder that comes with restricted tendencies, but not related to weight and shape, more so consequence-based. And what I mean when I say that is a fear of potential outcome or negative outcome from eating that particular food or foods. That could be illness, it could be physical symptom repercussion like stomach aches or pain, limited appetite or interest related to that. There's also a sensory component to this particular eating disorder. So you might notice that your adolescent is reporting not liking the texture of a food or the sensation of eating the food. Those are kind of indicators that we're seeing that sensory disruption with an ARFID diagnosis. So these clients are usually more limited in the foods that they are preferring. A lot of the work with these clients is exposure-based to try and increase the variety of food that they would be engaging with. Things to look out for is that kind of limitation or paring down of things that they are normally interested in, or a hyper focus on particular foods that they feel most comfortable eating and a reliance on those foods for their overall nutrition. Laura, I'll pause for a second and see if there's anything you want to throw in here too.
Definitely. There's a lot of information we just threw at you, and Haley did a great job going through. I would say that one of the key things I hope you recognized is that we did not talk about what a person's body looks like, because that is not a part of how we diagnose an eating disorder or identify disordered eating. It doesn't matter. So we may look at someone and make assumptions, but that is not what we can go to or understand when we're really trying to work with somebody. So it is one of the things that often gets misunderstood. What I also want to add to this is, you may be sitting here thinking you have a person in your life who fits every box. And you're like, oh my God, they have all of these. A lot of these behaviors, a lot of things you're going to see that we talk about are some things that kind of everybody does or may do at times. It does not mean they have an eating disorder. It does not mean they are diagnosed right now with one. We are always going to look for patterns of behavior, right? A one-time situation where a person sits down and has a much larger meal. Oftentimes we'll talk about that's kind of holidays for a lot of people, right? Things like that. These are normal things. Emotionally eating because they're upset or excited about something. These are things that we all engage in. If one day we're having a really hard day and we forget to eat lunch or struggle with something, like, again, patterns. That's what you really want to look out for. So like Haley said, if you noticed your young one talking a lot about food, about exercise, if they talk about it in almost a compensatory nature, like I need to do this to allow this, or if you start hearing language that puts a lot of like good, bad around what they're doing in their relationship with food, that's when we really want to start to perk up, because that's when we're going to start to see that it's not just the behaviors that maybe are concerning, it's how they're thinking about their relationship with food and their body. And again, those are the kinds of things we're going to hear with our first three. I think also really important to take notice of when we're talking about ARFID, is that there is a high correlation with ARFID when we talk about people diagnosed with autism. Again, does not mean someone who has one has the other, but there is a high correlation. So again, that sensory piece starts to make sense when we look at those two together a little bit more. I also think like this is what we typically talk about as our picky eaters. Again, it does not mean a person has ARFID if they really like one food and that's kind of their go-to. What we want to be looking out for, is it interfering with their health, their kind of thriving in terms of physical well-being as well as social, right? If this is a kid who can't go out to eat with friends or with family because of these struggles, that's impacting their functioning. Then we're starting to see it as a concern and issue. If they typically really just like mac and cheese and that's all they want to go to, but can do other things and it's not an issue in other areas, that's okay. We all have our favorite foods and we all go through kind of patterns of foods we like. So again, don't immediately jump to that fear and think something's wrong, but these are things to be paying attention to.
I also just want to add into we'll talk about this a little bit later as well, but the language when we're using to talk about these things, and we'll talk about how much language matters in communicating about them. And on top of that, just the acknowledgement that, eating disorders and disordered eating really thrive in secrecy. So we want to create an environment in which our adolescents are able to really come to us and talk to us about these things so they don't get the benefit of the secrecy in which they can really kind of take off and turn into something, way worse off. So we want to give that open space.
So now, as we've kind of talked about a diagnosed eating disorder, keeping in mind that this has to be diagnosed by a psychologist or a therapist or a psychiatrist, they have to meet certain criteria in what we call the DSM-5, which is where somebody is diagnosed, to receive an actual diagnosis. Like Haley said, a lot of adolescents in particular are going to have a range of behaviors. And just because they don't receive a diagnosis of an eating disorder does not mean they may not be struggling or suffering. It means they could be very close to a diagnosable eating disorder, or it could mean they're struggling with what we call disordered eating. And sadly, what you are going to hear from us is that you know exactly what disordered eating is and you see it a lot. So to shift a little bit to that focus, when we talk about disordered eating, I really think this definition is powerful, and I am going to take a moment to read it. Disordered eating is a broad term that refers to a range of behaviors and attitudes towards food and body image that have negative consequences for physical and mental health through patterns of disordered eating, though patterns of disordered eating may look different for each individual. Disordered eating is conveniently hidden under the guise of health due to the prevalence of diet culture. So that's a lot there, but let me slow this down. We're talking about not just behavior someone engages in. We're talking about the values, the beliefs, the attitudes they have about food, about their body. And we're talking about how that can affect not just their thinking and their physical health, but also their emotional well-being, and can lead to other mental health struggles. So this is huge because this can mean small things that someone notices or does, or it can mean something that is so intense, it's very much disrupting a person's life and their functioning. And the reality that we sometimes don't notice it because people define it in a, I'm trying to be healthy. Oh, I'm trying to eat healthy. I'm trying to get healthier. We have no idea what that means. It can mean something very good for a person, but if I don't know what that means for that person, it also may mean disordered. Disordered eating, as you see, can exist on a spectrum like we're talking about, where it may have very little impact on a person's everyday functioning, or it may be completely crippling their functioning. I think one of the most shocking things we can say about disordered eating is that the number one type of disordered eating is called dieting. Literally dieting. Dieting is actually disordered in nature, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So there's no way we aren't exposed to this. There's no way we don't know about it, and there's no way we don't know anybody who, whether conscious or not, engages in these behaviors. It is normalized, as it says, in our society. So that is a little bit shocking to kind of sit in. And what I'm going to ask is, we talked about being self-reflective. As you are hearing us say this, you might have a response and be like, what are these people talking about? That's okay. We want you to have that moment of thinking, because what we're going to talk about and what we talk about with our kids when they're in program with us, or when we're really starting to help teach and learn about these things, is we are going to be the minority in the room. We are going to be a different voice for these kids. That's going to be challenging what they're typically hearing, whether that be from friends, or go back to our TikTok, or sadly what they're hearing from, you know, messages from people in their lives, or even, you know, trusted people, or just different influences. There's a lot of misinformation out there about what it means to have a healthy relationship with food in your body. So with that, I'm going to let Haley jump into why dieting is actually disordered.
So when we think about kind of the grander idea of dieting and diet culture, you know, there is certainly like a multi-billion-dollar industry that is built around creating and developing diets and what they look like and setting the standards for those. What ends up typically happening for an individual who engages in any sort of diet is the cycle that we see right in front of us. So the attempt or engagement in whatever that diet is set up as, you know, and we hear things like the keto diet, intermittent fasting, you know, Weight Watchers, all of those things that are set up, you know, with intention to serve a certain purpose, but, you know, really kind of sets us up to fail in a lot of ways, unfortunately. So we start with whatever the diet is to be set out as, move into where we are getting that sense of deprivation, and not just on a food-based level, but there's deprivation in your emotional satisfaction too. Think about it. If you're being told, I have to cut out, you know, a portion of the things that I would typically be grabbing for, or that I find to be particularly yummy, you know, that's not going to contribute to positive satisfaction and mental health. So the food is definitely a component of it. And physically, there will be that point of deprivation where your body just simply isn't getting all of the things, the nutrients, calories intake that it needs. And that will contribute to psychological deprivation as well. You know, our brains and our bodies need all of that fuel, all of those different vitamins and minerals that are going to come from all of the different places that we would be resourcing them from, all the things that we stop for in the grocery store that contribute to that, all would put us in that space of deprivation. When we're in that sense of deprivation, we flip into a bit of a survival mode. Our bodies are primed to keep us safe and well. And when they start to recognize or signal that we are losing intake, or losing something that we are needing essentially, we start to break those rules. We're bucking against what feels bad and what is contributing to our psychological and physical feelings of deprivation, sometimes starvation. So we're breaking rules we might see that sense of overeating or binging where it kind of, works in the other direction. And we see that kind of spike in the other way. And then we're left to feel guilty. So we're stuck with kind of the secondary emotions, guilt, confusion, shame, not really sure how to get back on track, really stuck in what do I do next? Leading us to feel unhappy, and we move back into that place of feeling unhappy with ourselves, with our weight, feeling as though we've failed, really struggling to find our way back. And we think that the answer is to return to a different version, go back to a different way in which we can contribute to the diet cycle, because the way that we had went about it the first time didn't work. So we hop back onto that train and try again and loop back around to the top. It is a kind of a vicious cycle, and it feels really hard to break away from that. Like I mentioned before, it is a multi-billion dollar industry that is set up to help us in this sort of a way. And doing something different, as Laura was mentioning, it feels like a part of the counterculture. It feels like something that goes against what is so ingrained in our messaging, and we see it everywhere. We're driving down 95 and we're seeing billboards about this. We open up our phones and we're seeing messages about this. We turn on our TVs and we're seeing this. So it makes sense to think that it is the best next step, but oftentimes it leads to this cycle that we get really stuck in, and ultimately just are stuck feeling unhappy and shameful.
I think it's so powerful when you stop to think about what Haley said in regards to the deprivation. Our bodies don't know the difference in regards to like true starvation because of, let's say, famine, to I'm on a really restrictive diet, or I'm not even on a really restrictive diet, but I'm not allowing my body to get certain nutrients. It doesn't know or make the difference. It just goes into survival mode. And so again, this idea that we can somehow stop our bodies or control our bodies from doing the very thing that they're made to do. Our number one job is survival. Our second number one job is to adapt to survive. So we're fighting the very nature to which our bodies are built for and our systems are created for. And so no matter how hard we try, we're actually fighting against ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, again, if you think about the psychological component, I think we can all relate to a certain extent that if I say to you, you can't do something or have something, usually that's the first place our mind takes us. And so again, oftentimes it's the expectations that get set, the kind of extremes that we set up, the rigidity of it's all or nothing. Again, we'll get into that language, and that's a lot of how this kind of really gets created. The other piece that I think is really important, because we live in a culture that really highlights and normalizes the value of our bodies and what that means about us as individuals, there's a lot of morality at times and judgment placed on not just what my body looks like, but what it means for me as a person, who I am, and what my value is if I'm not falling in line with those expectations. So I'm not just failing at my quote unquote diet, I'm failing as a person. My worth and value is being, I'm shown to be not, strong enough, not willpowered enough, not all of these things. So when I feel bad and guilty, it's not just about I'm eating or about my body, it's about who I am as a person. That's a really powerful, damaging, scary place to be. And so you can see why we so quickly turn back to something that's going to hopefully help fix that and make us feel worthy again. So again, so much more than food, so much more than our relationship with body is what is getting tapped into here.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, just to go a little bit off of that, if we want to pull it out too, what we're saying with like diet culture and getting in the diet cycle is that there is only value placed on our physical presence, when in fact there's so much more to that. And when we think about adolescence and the identity building that goes on in this period of time for our young folks, like it's so important to instill and help them to see it isn't just your physical presence that's important. It's your mind, it's your thoughts, it's your feelings, it's your, future experiences, the goals you have. And if we get caught in this cycle of, existence, we really lose attachment to all those other aspects of our identity and ourselves.
So as adults, we struggle with that sometimes. Again, our young adolescents who haven't yet had that ability to really strengthen those identities are at a much greater risk. So Haley, I'm going to let you jump in here to that as well.
Yes. So before we were talking about the idea of body dissatisfaction. So we wanted to take a moment to really just acknowledge all the ways that we see influences toward how body dissatisfaction is produced. So Laura, if you want to just keep hitting, we'll go through here. We have weight stigma, bullying, teasing, social media, our peer groups, family systems, sports teams, the ads that we're seeing in all forms, TV and movies, so our media and other ways, the environment that we exist in, trends and fads, clothing and shopping, and just like stores in general also, gender norms or expected gender roles, the idea of perfectionism or perfectionistic tendencies, normal patterns of development, puberty and adolescence, and the normal growth and development that comes in that, and just general self-esteem and self-worth, all of which can contribute to overall body dissatisfaction. And also probably so many more, and each person is really individualized in how they experience these influences. So when we were doing a little bit of research and prep for this, one of the things that we came across with body dissatisfaction is a report. It was a mock poll from University of Michigan, but 73% of adolescent girls and 69% of adolescent boys were reporting some level of body dissatisfaction, which is just like so incredibly high if we think about how many adolescents are out there and just feeling stuck in body dissatisfaction. Also want to acknowledge 9 out of 10 LGBTQ plus youth reported being dissatisfied with their bodies, and rates of body dissatisfaction being significantly higher among transgender and non-binary youth compared to cisgender youth. Those stats are really just highlighting how prevalent this is, and maybe opening up more conversations to talk about it so it doesn't have to be that way or continue to be that way. But the other part that we want to highlight and acknowledge is that body dissatisfaction can lead to disordered eating and or eating disorder emergence. So if they're already feeling that sense of body dissatisfaction, feeling that influence from all of the places that we had acknowledged from above, how do we control that? How do we change that? How do I manipulate what I see in order to achieve an outcome that I feel that I need to? That's where we see the disordered eating or eating disorder emergence. What we've also come to find is that with the disordered eating or eating disorders, they're also at increased risk for all of the things we see listed below. I'll just highlight a couple of those. Overall low self-worth, more risk-taking behaviors, potential for substance misuse. The eating disorder and disordered eating behaviors can morph into other areas. One of the things that we had noticed when we were developing the program at Nourish was that oftentimes our clients were kind of symptom hopping. So if we were paying attention to the disordered eating patterns, they might slow down on those when we were paying attention to them, but then pick up in another area like substance use or self-harm. And that bounce around makes so much sense. If I can't control or I want to control in one area, but I can't do that right now, I'm going to control in another kind of way, which is where we started to see the increased risk in these other areas as well. And Laura, you want to hit that one more time? So at the bottom here, I'm hoping that everyone can see this, so I'll read it just in case it gets cut off for anybody. Disordered eating behaviors, or DEBs, are associated with higher risk for adverse health outcomes, even when a young person does not meet full criteria for a clinical eating disorder. So even our youths who are reporting disordered eating patterns or we're noticing disordered eating patterns are at risk just as much as an individual who's already been diagnosed with an eating disorder and potentially receiving treatment. And with that, there's always the risk for these other behaviors or tendencies that we might see from them.
I think, again, what Haley spoke to is Nourish, our program was built with this in mind, that if our kids are struggling, it's likely that they're struggling in more than just one area. And disordered eating is really a predictor of so many other potential other mental health and physically concerning outcomes, especially for our youth. And if we don't interject soon through preventative measures or kind of get in there when we start to see these things happening, these are developments that will follow our kids into their adulthood. We really need to be able to provide some buffering for our kids. We need to be able to help them have language to put to these feelings and these thoughts. And we need to be able to open those conversations up, like Haley said. And it's amazing when you let kids have that space, how much they actually will talk about how complicated these feelings are and how much they don't really know or what they do. And you start to see they have a lot of insight, but they don't always know what to do or where to go with how they're feeling.
Mhm.
And I do think it's so important to highlight too that, everybody is at risk. And I'm going to look a little bit at some more research that helps us see this. But we always recognize that there are some populations that are potentially at a higher risk. So we do need to be mindful that if we have a loved one that maybe does fall into one of those higher categories, that's a piece that we need to pay attention to as well.
Mhm. And if we also want to just acknowledge and kind of boil down here too, all of these behaviors that are more observable markers or things that we might be kind of more visibly or tangibly seeing are all usually a cover for something else that's going on. And that might be rooted in body dissatisfaction, but especially with adolescents, we really think about the identity component of things, bullying, peer teasing, body teasing that Laura will talk about in just a minute. But all of the things that are really sitting underneath what is more observable to us. I'll let Laura go ahead now.
As you can tell, we can get going and not want to stop. So again, this is not new information. There is a lot of research. There is so much more that needs to be done, unfortunately, in the field. Disordered eating disorders is still lagging far behind in terms of research, but there is plenty of research that tells us we need to stand up and pay attention and have more around this topic and more around this to be aware of. So body dissatisfaction, again, which seems like such an obvious thing that, adolescents are going to struggle with, people are going to have a hard time with, really does give us a heads up that it is very prevalent, but it also is a strong predictor of other potential concerning things. So in one study, what we found was this was a longitudinal study that looked at kids at the age of 14 and then later again at the age of 18 to 21. So there was a bit of a range, but long-term looked at these kids and found that early on, 50% identified females struggled with body dissatisfaction, 30% of our males, that those who were already struggling with that were actively involved in disordered eating behaviors or already with a diagnosed eating disorder. And that this group also already were displaying low self-esteem, depression, and increased risk of suicidal ideation. So we see again that one is often kind of flowing into the next, that if I'm struggling in one way, it's already starting to play into my overall mental health and sense of self. What we also found in this, and I think it's really important to recognize, is that later on, we were seeing that we could anticipate that if we saw body dissatisfaction early on for our kids, we were more likely to see other behaviors. And in this one particular study, it showed that for our identified females, if we saw body dissatisfaction when they were younger, it was highly correlated that we were also going to see behaviors like smoking, drug use, self-harm, and high-risk drinking behaviors. And the reason that is we start to see, like Haley said, we're looking for ways to cope. We're looking for things to grab onto and control and fix. And how we're going about doing that is by finding things that aren't really going to help us get there. And so quickly on, we need to help our adolescents learn that, it's a really easy thing to do where you may be really struggling with, let's say, anxiety, and it's related to all of those bubbles that we listed in the last slide, but a lot of those are out of my control. So if I can't control those, where can I turn that energy? Where can I grab some sense of control? Our bodies are one area that we think and can have some impact on. So it's a lot of the places that, especially for adolescents who don't have a lot of control of a lot of things in their lives, where they feel like they can have some, and they don't even recognize what that is, that they may be turning in that way. It does really feel for them that that is the main issue. We have to help them see the bigger picture. So a lot of times we'll talk about body image, negative body image can really be kind of like a red flag of some other major pieces going on for someone. Mm-hmm. And then another study that was represented talked about similarly body dissatisfaction in adolescent teen boys was highly correlated with drug use later on, as well as binge drinking. So again, stereotypes of this just being something that impacts people who identify as female is far gone. We may see things look a little bit differently. Sometimes they look the same, but there's still desire to feel good in your body. There's still expectations based on how somebody identifies. And we need to be recognizing that we're all feeling those, all of our kids, no matter how they identify. One other thing that's really important to talk about is, like Haley said, weight teasing. This is so common, right? We know this happens. We may even notice it in playful ways, even in our own relationships and families. We see it as jokes on TV, in movies. It's a very easy kind of low-hanging fruit that people often go to. But when we're talking about the impact that this can have, it's significant, and especially in our youth. So this is speaking to the idea that in our society, we know weight stigma exists. It is one of the isms that is there, along with discrimination of all kinds, but it's the one we don't tend to talk as much about. It just exists a little bit more insidious, under the surface, excuse me. And just the exposure to weight stigma, meaning being a part of our society, is for adolescents strongly correlated with poor psychosocial health outcomes. Again, it ties into what we talked about before. If I'm trying to find my sense of self and I have all of these different expectations and ways of feeling like I have to present physically, emotionally, mentally, in all these ways, it gets very hard to manage that burden of all these things. And so what ends up happening a lot of the times is it's not just about how I feel about my body, or it's not just how I feel about my appearance. It starts to challenge how I feel about all aspects of myself. And so I start to feel less confident, lower self-esteem, maybe more depressed that I don't meet these expectations or these unrealistic ideals. And so we start to see it play into all different ways. And like Haley said, kids can really get stuck in, this is the only way that I can show value, right? What we also know to be the case is that adolescence is such a critical point. Again, we talked about for prevention, but also for intervention. And so we really need to be willing to step in and be a place for these kids to challenge these thoughts, challenge these ways of thinking. And so again, this is going to come back to how we're going to talk about we can support our loved ones, but understanding how important that piece really is. Finally, disordered eating disorders, they do not discriminate. It does not matter who you are, where you come from, how you identify. It impacts everyone. And it can really be, like we said, kind of an indication of so many other potential concerns. So regardless of race or ethnicity, regardless of socioeconomic status, and regardless of how somebody identifies by gender, there is no difference. We are all at risk. And while we identify that there may be some populations that could be at a higher risk, nobody can be overlooked as this isn't something that's going to have an impact on them. So what do? We need to start paying attention to a lot of things, but language is a key piece of that. So Haley, I'll let you jump in.
Sure. So on the screen in front of us, we just provided a couple examples of things that are, I would say, probably commonly come up with the families and adolescents that we're working with. Again, ways in which we have been exposed to culturally kind of the norm around how we engage with food and how we engage with our bodies. Good and bad foods, placing moral judgment on foods. Food is healthy versus unhealthy. Body neutrality, looking at function over appearance, joyful movement versus intensive exercise. All of these things are ways that we can start to think about how are we communicating about food, how are we communicating about our bodies, and how are we communicating about movement to our young individuals here. Something that I think is really hard is like allowing for ourselves to slow down. At the beginning, when we were asking everyone to kind of sit in some reflection, that was a moment of pause. And these conversations are uncomfortable. And these are things that may or may not already be ingrained in the adolescence that we're dealing with at home. And it's okay to open up these conversations and challenge some of the norms and, be the person that's on the opposite end of things. ask the question why. Why are we thinking that this is good versus bad? Why are we feeling shame about not getting in the extra exercise hour that we thought that we needed to do? Curiosity, language, just the slow down and shift can make such a difference in how we're interacting and engaging with our youth.
And I think to step back before we can do that also means we have to, again, be self-reflective, because there may be some of the things on this screen that you recognize you do feel or think and often hold yourself to. And it is not about judging it. It's not about saying, oh my goodness, I'm the cause of, or I'm ruining. Not at all. Like we said, this is so overpowering that we don't even know that these are the ways we think and feel sometimes. We don't even know that we maybe act in these ways. We don't even know if we actually believe or feel these things. We just often do because that's what we're used to. I can't tell you how many times I'm out in the world and I hear just casual, body bashing by somebody, or someone judging what they're doing and being self-deprecating because they chose to get a dessert, or, oh, this is a fail today. I'm going to have to get back on it tomorrow. Like, it is so ingrained for us. So if we notice that we ourselves are having this kind of language where I talk about, oh, I was bad today because of what I ate, or I do talk about feeling fat, again, we're not judging. We're asking us to slow down and pay attention and recognize that how you express and talk about your relationship with food and body is something that the kids in your life, the adolescents in your life, and honestly, everyone in your life is going to notice and feel, and is going to have some impact on them. Mm-hmm. So we want to be mindful of what are the messaging we're providing. If we want our kids to have a different experience, we may need to be willing to shift some of the things that we're talking about and how we're expressing things.
I think the other part of this too is a lot of this language is rooted in the all or nothing, in the failure or success and nothing in between. And part of the practice is finding our way to that middle ground, that gray area, the compromise. Where can we find space to sit in the discomfort that multiple things can be true, or that there is wiggle room for it not to be, I've failed today because I did, X, Y, or Z, or I succeeded today because I did X, Y, and Z. There's so much more to it. There's so much room to have space.
So again, we're therapists, so we're going to make you do it, is another kind of self-reflection. Because food is such an important part of our lives, both for survival, but also for connection. Food is something that a lot of messaging gets passed down through. It communicates a lot of things in family systems. And just like we have values that our families provide for us, there may also be messaging about food or body that you have received in your own families of origin. Again, it's not about judging them. It's not about saying they're all good or they're all bad, but just slowing down and stopping and asking yourself, can you think of something that was a message you received? Mm-hmm. I have to speak to being a child of an Italian mom. Food is love, and food is love whether you want that food or not. You are going to be given that bowl of raviolis, and you're going to be told, why aren't you eating enough? Why aren't you eating more? And that's a beautiful thing and a wonderful thing, but it's also kind of confusing because it's not based on, am I physically hungry and do I really want this? Or is it just, if I don't do this, I feel like I'm disrespecting my grandmother or my mother, or I'm not accepting that love. And again, that's so many layers to things, but the intention is usually very good, but how it's received and the way it can interact. And then unfortunately, there are messages that maybe aren't with the intention of, just expressing love, but about like, what are some true beliefs held? And some of that may be around that morality of what it means to be a certain, to look a certain way, or to be in a certain type of relationship with food or your body.
Yeah. And in preparation for this, when Laura and I were putting this, presentation together, we were reflecting on some of our own experiences and messages that we received. And I had shared with Laura, this was a close family friend, so not my family of origin, but close family friend, and something that has stuck with me, all these years away from this. Walking into the kitchen of that household, and on the refrigerator, there was a Post-it note that just said, nothing tastes as good as skinny feels. and right on the refrigerator. So when you're going to grab your food, that like guilt trip right there. And that stuck with me. It's something that stands out that, was a way in which that particular person's family functioned and that particular person's mom functioned. And landed with me, and I reflect on it often, when I'm thinking about messages around food and body.
So again, just being willing to consider your family now, where you come from, and just being able to take note. This is us talking about, okay, so what do? We just kind of gave you a lot of information, and Haley already alluded to it. A lot of it is, can we pay attention first for ourselves and start to take note of where maybe we are doing a good job of bringing in conversation, asking our loved ones about their feelings. Do we talk at all about these things? What's it like for you in your body? Like, do you feel comfortable in your body? Do you not? When your child says something, can you follow it up with curiosity? Again, so much of, the challenge of talking and working with adolescents is, the reality of they are moody and they don't always want to talk. And so you have to, pick your moments and pick your places. But we also, if we lay that foundation for them, that we are curious, that we do want to have those conversations, and it becomes a topic that we're willing to put out there, they may take us up on it. Maybe not when we ask them, but maybe randomly down the road. Or they do in a moment decide they are willing to talk to you about something, but only if we're sometimes laying it out there for them. So like we talked about earlier, we're looking for patterns, right? We're looking for behaviors, whether it's with food, with body, or in how they're talking, how they feel about themselves. Are they somebody who wants to go out, tries on 10 different outfits, and then decides they can't go out? Be curious about that. It may have nothing to do with body image or body, but be curious about that. Those are things that we need to pay attention to. So often it's not what the person is doing, but we want to engage with how are they feeling and what's going on for them when X, Y, or Z happens. We talked about how important the language we use is, and paying attention to the language that we hear our loved ones saying. And what are the people in their lives around them saying that aren't just you? What are their friends saying? What are the important people in their lives, coaches, other adults, like Haley mentioned, other loved ones? We really need to be able to talk to our kids about being critical consumers of media. Understanding that the beauty and diet and exercise industries are billions and billions of dollars industries is important in the sense that they're selling and they need to make us want to buy. So everything is geared towards making us feel like what they can do for us is going to make everything better. Kids need to learn and understand how much of what is presented is not truth, not reality. And they need to start to understand and think about it from that lens. And so we have to help them do that. That's hard. That's hard even for us, right? So again, we need to be able to kind of show them and talk about those things with them. Similar to all types of, parenting, like some really good things to do is just be interested, to pay attention, to ask about what are they interested in, really understanding. Like if you have a loved one who really is into fashion or really into certain things, even if that's not your thing, ask them about it, talk to them about it, be curious. If you have things that maybe you're concerned about, again, ask, be interested. You may find that this is a wonderful thing and you don't have any room for concern. But the idea is that you're asking, you're paying attention. And I think the last one is always a challenge because, we forget that parents are actually humans who have a lot of other things going on in their day-to-day lives, like their own feelings, their own experiences, their own responsibilities outside of just, calmly approaching their kids. But as best you can, these are conversations to have when there is space, when there is that ability to do it so in a calm and curious way. Because again, there's a lot of intense emotions and complex emotions around food and body, and very quickly we can activate judgment or shame without any intention. So we want to make sure that we're in the right mindset when we are having those conversations.
I think the other thing that I would add in here too is that none of this is a perfect process, and it looks really nice up on a screen on a Zoom call that we're all sitting here together with. We know that our adolescents are adolescents and they will respond accordingly. But opening up the potential that these are things that you are interested in, that you want to know more about, we open the space, and even if it's not used in that moment, it's something that they come back to. It's something that they clock in their brains and go, hey, mom or dad asked about this and I'm feeling some type of way about it. Maybe I want to venture in and learn a little bit more, or um, you know walk through that door, if you will. You've extended the hand, you've opened the space, you've expressed the interest. You've been mindful, you've been using your language, you've been thinking about your own experiences, and that goes a long way.
I would even say too, like if maybe at times you have said things that now you're thinking, oh, maybe that wasn't the best way I talked about food or my body. There's a great opportunity to come back to that with your loved one. Or if, let's even say it's not even you, but someone in their life does have that kind of frame, the next time you're around or there's that opportunity to kind of say, you know what, I noticed so and so does a lot of like judging about themselves and their body. It makes me, and however it may make you feel, but have you ever noticed that? How does that make you feel? And you may be able to share, like, it makes me sad that they're so hard on themselves, or that they can't just sometimes relax and enjoy, that they feel like they have to earn things. And again, it's giving a little bit of the opportunity for them to know and think about something in a way what they might already be doing that, or they may not have put that together, and you're helping them see that and kind of be like, oh yeah, they do that a lot. And so you're, again, like you always would as loved ones, trying to guide them, trying to help them see something and help them understand that they're going to have to make choices around it, but you want to give them a sense of, it doesn't have to look like this, and it doesn't have to be the way your relationship looks or feels. So with that, we want to slow it down and be aware that there may be thoughts, there may be questions of any kind, and including some that are kind of like, I don't know if I believe this or agree with this. We're open to all of those conversations and look forward to some more discussion.
Well, thank you both so much. That was fascinating and really well done. I'm so grateful to you. I learned a lot. Uh, we had some really great questions in advance, and I think that one that I wanted to bring up, one question was specific to teen boys about signs, and you talked obviously about a lot of the different kinds of patterns, and you described the different types of disordered eating. And I appreciated that you said look for patterns, look for some consistency in some of these things. Would you say there are different profiles based on gender?
There can be. Yeah, it's a great question. Again, you have to know your person, right? How they identify, and not assume that just because they identify as male, they're going to respond one way or female another way. Again, we don't all fit in these perfect boxes. But typically, what we see in terms of for our adolescent male clients is think about we talk about body ideals a lot for women. It's a little bit more known. But if I asked you to pause right now and think about what you would imagine the expectation is for the ideal man or ideal body of a man, I bet you can think of it. Picture, the Marvel superheroes, right? Picture you know, the muscular, kind of still somehow lean, really strong guy. These are the things that we we know boys are kind of drawn to more, right? Like the idea of I need to be bigger, I need to be strong, I need to be more muscular. So you'll hear oftentimes more conversation around wanting to build up, right? Wanting to get stronger, wanting to be obviously taller, which again, not something we can control, but more about that side of things, strength, muscle building. You'll start to hear people talk a lot about, like, that's where you might see people get into like, oh, I got to do more protein shakes, or this is where unfortunately sometimes too we do start to see like abuse of steroids and different things like excessive gym, things like that. So that end is typically more kind of like the classic way we're going to see boys express it or guys express it. But again, not always the case. We have to be willing to talk to them about it a little bit as well.
I think just to hop in a little bit too, I think pretty standardly more like female dominated sports around like ballet and dance, there are certain kind of indicators in that. And similarly with males, when we see things like wrestling or like football, they're looking to make or maintain weights in order to be successful in their sports. If that's something that one of the adolescents that you're engaging with is participating in, just extra eyes and ears paying attention to, is there a meet coming up? Is there something that I need to be doing to make sure that I, step on the scale and I can, be an active participant in what I'm doing?
And it doesn't mean people can't engage in those sports or those activities in healthy ways, but some definitely put more energy and focus on one appearance and also two, the physicality of something. And so again, it's really important there that if they're getting messages around certain things like you have to make weight, helping them recognize that in this sport, in this way, at these times, this is what your body needs to do, but that doesn't mean this is what your body always will do or should do. And how are we doing that? There are ways we can do this that are not so damaging or confusing or distorted as well.
Thank you. Great. And I really want, I have so many questions, but I really want to hear from other folks who are on this call. So please feel free to either use the raise hand feature or unmute and just go ahead and jump in with a question. We would really love to hear from you. Is there a difference between disordered eating and appetite loss due to depression? And how can we tell the difference?
That's a great question. So yes, oftentimes, and again, one of the key things we have to support our kids and all of us around is understanding that our emotions, our mood has a huge impact, right, on how we feel. If you've ever been anxious for giving a presentation or talking in front of a group, you might notice your stomach hurt. You might notice butterflies. Our bodies tell us what we're feeling emotionally. So one of the biggest things that we have to really work on with our kids is we talk about what is our physical hunger fullness? So what do our bodies need? And what have we done to support, either take in and give our bodies that resource, or what are we needing to do? And then what is our emotional hunger and fullness? So when my emotions are really intense, that may cause me to not feel like I am hungry or pay attention to hunger cues because I'm overwhelmed. Depression absolutely is a symptom of depression is a loss of appetite. And usually, again, that's because when someone is depressed, they're so overwhelmed by those feelings, so full, so to speak, that their body and emotion connection kind of gets split. And so their bodies may be communicating, but they may not be paying attention anymore. And so they don't feel it. It's amazing that we can train ourselves not to feel our body's cues, but they are still there whether we're paying attention to them or not. So we have a lot of kids that, especially in adolescence, we start to help them make this connection that they're like, well, I don't have a problem with eating. I just don't eat when I'm sad. Be like, but that's not okay. Your body still needs you to take care of itself. That doesn't help you. But you also need to deal with this thing you're sad about. So sometimes we'll see that kids don't even realize that they're having that experience. And if they are someone who struggles when they are, more depressed or they're struggling with their mood and they notice that impact, we want to help increase their embodiment, right? Their awareness of that connection, that physically this may be happening, emotionally this may be happening, but both need to be taken care of, right? And so if we have someone in our life who's struggling with depression and that's a symptom for them, we need to be able to have that conversation of like, I know you're feeling really sad and you're feeling really down and you might not feel hungry, but your body still needs to eat. It still needs fuel, just like we have to put it in the car to make it go. And if we're not, it's going to be so much harder to break out of those feelings and do the things we need to do to help us move through that depression. It's such a key thing.
Yeah. When I think too, with improvement of the symptoms that come along with depression and treatment around depression, if we're also seeing that indication that all of a sudden I'm feeling better. I am feeling less depressed, and all of a sudden my appetite's back. How amazing. We can pretty, nicely kind of tie that up and understand that it was a byproduct of the depression as opposed to trends or patterns of behavior related to disordered eating. On the other end of things, I'm also thinking about, oh my goodness, I just totally lost my train of thought.
I'm wondering if you were going to, we have a lot of our loved ones who may be on medication for ADHD or stimulants. And oftentimes we know stimulants will suppress appetite. So if you have a loved one who takes a medication, you may have the situation that's you have a kid all day who's not hungry. And then you may notice that at a time when their medication might start to wear off, suddenly they're very hungry. We really need to, again, work with these kids to help them understand that you may not be feeling it, but your body still needs fuel. And if we wait all day, then we find ourselves falling into, again, not intentionally, but by any means, like kind of this all or nothing. So I've restricted all day, not because I want to, but because I don't feel my hunger cue. And then suddenly I'm tuned in and I'm starving. And when we eat from that place, we don't give our body time to register being satiated. And so we often go into kind of an overeating mode. And that's very easy to do, but that can then trigger feelings of shame or guilt or confusion, and then lead to other types of restricting, right? So we really have to work with our loved one to understand what experience they're having and why. And a lot of times with medications, that's a big piece of, we might have to do more scheduling around, like, hey, you need to make sure you eat a snack, or hey, I know you don't feel really hungry once you take this, so let's make sure you get breakfast in first. And again, that's something a therapist, that's something working with a dietitian can really support, because that's oftentimes something we see kind of in a different way. It's not disordered, but it is impacting hungerfulness.
Mhm.
I don't know if that's where you were going.
I don't think so, but that's okay. The train is at the station.
Oh, well.
Thank you for that. Best advice on how or where to direct teens who won't listen to feedback being suggested specifically from me. Boy, do I get that as a parent, right?
Yeah. I think one of the things that I often hear most is like parents say, well, I tell them that. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm not mom or dad. So, hey, listen. So, again, I will often speak to the value of therapy, but I will say that having people in your loved one's life who are not just mom and dad or a caregiver is really helpful, because sometimes they will take in messages a little bit more easily. And if you have the opportunity to have a set place like therapy, that becomes a place where they may be more willing at times to take in some feedback or information, or they may come around to things a little bit differently. And it's okay if initially you get rejection. You might have to do more of the curiosity approach than the, hey, I think you need to do this. But I think sometimes too, that's where having other supports in your loved one's life can be really helpful. Haley, I'll let you speak to that as well.
I was just going to say too, like thinking about their like pre-existing support system. So are they on a team where they have a coach that they like really love? Are they engaged in an activity with an instructor or, some other person who they really care about as well, and might receive that feedback in a different kind of way. It always sounds differently coming from mom and dad. Sometimes as like therapists, it sounds differently coming from us, and we're kind of the talking heads in the room. But are there pre-existing people within your social circle that they naturally gravitate to, and related to things they feel importance towards? Like, are they really invested in excelling at their sport? Are they really invested in debate team? I don't know. Where are those areas that they feel most drawn to? And that's, a good resource to tap into.
I would also say siblings sometimes, like older siblings, can be a great resource as well. They have that relatability quality sometimes that, obviously parents and adults can't have.
And I really do appreciate this question too, because I think that so much of the challenge around parenting is, the question was about providing feedback. But I would love to hear your thoughts about modeling, because I'm thinking a lot about this, and I personally am impacted by disordered eating, as are some members of my family. And I think that modeling that, like, oh God, if I could spin back the clock and not have the dissatisfied body image that I expressed throughout my children's formative years, I would love to have a do-over on the words that came out of my mouth. can't do it. So what are some of the ways either we can foundationally, before you get to where I am in life, have some really healthy language around that, and how can we just kind of reflect on our own patterns in front of our children that might translate to them, so that we're not really giving feedback, but just saying like, man, I wish, or I feel this, or what are your thoughts?
No, that's so great. And I really appreciate your honesty in that, because I think, no one is perfect, and there's always going to be things that we as individuals struggle with, and we can't, nor should we, expect our kids to think that we have no struggles of our own. But I think what you said is really key. As parents, whether we think it or not, our kids are taking in everything, right? They see, they recognize, they kind of know things almost sometimes better than we do about what we're doing or how we're doing things. So even if we think we're hiding certain things, they pick up on it. There are some amazing studies that have been done, and this one is a little dated, but there was a study done actually by the Dove campaign does a really great looking at like positive body and things, and they've done things for years. But one of the studies they did was they brought in young children. At the time, it was just young girls. I think it was age like 6 to 8, and they asked them like, what do you like about your body? How do you feel about your body? And they asked them like, is there anything you don't like about your body? And they had answers. And what ended up happening was when they had the same conversation with the mothers, it was literally identical. That you would have these little 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds responding with, I don't like my stomach, because they hear their mother saying that, or I don't like the way my legs are. It was like down to like, the messaging is so powerful because they don't yet know what that relationship is supposed to look like. So they hear what we hear, they say what we say, and then they start to feel it as well. And so again, that modeling is so key. It's not just what you're saying to them, it's also what we're doing. So if we really are willing, it has to start with our own, can we start to think about how we're interacting with food in our bodies? And are we happy in a place where maybe we still are struggling in a lot of ways? Is this working for me? And am I willing to kind of say, I don't want to keep doing this? And, can I be honest about that with my kid? And like we said, have a reparative opportunity and be like, you know what? I have to be honest. This is something that I have really struggled with. And I realize maybe I haven't always said or done the right things around you when it comes to my relationship with food and body. And I want to really let you know that that's not the experience I want you to have. I want you to have a better relationship than I have. So I'm really going to start being more mindful and aware, and I want you to help me even. And maybe this is something we can work on together.
And kind of going off of that too, I think about the importance and the impact of acknowledging our own humanness, acknowledging that you are, you are the parent, but you also have human experiences, kind of like what Laura was saying. I think there is like this pressure for parents to feel like they always have to have the answer or the perfect response or go about it in the perfect way. And holding those expectations for yourself also sets our children up to feel like they need to hold themselves to similar standards. And that's just not the case. So giving yourself a little bit of grace and wiggle room as well. And, I am human, I'm going to make mistakes. And I can go back to that conversation that we had and kind of try again, or, acknowledge like I kind of stumbled here and I don't feel great about, the way that, we proceeded here. I was thinking about a quote that I'd come across in my own social media perusing about how, our kids are growing up hearing that they look just like us, or, you're the spitting image of mom, you're the spitting image of dad. And that lands and that matters too. And if they're hearing that constantly and all we're doing is bashing the way that we look, how are they going to land and feel about that as well?
Great point. Thank you for that. There's another question that came in. Here's another question. Okay. Have studies shown a genetic predisposition to disordered eating or eating disorders? I realize there are learned behaviors, which we were just discussing for families, but can we inherit risk? And I know that there's some studies with epigenetics and famine and things. Is that right?
Yeah, so eating disorders are complex. They really require a number of things, and genetics is something we are learning as a part of it. There is research that shows that first generation is more likely to have a correlation similar to how we see anxiety, depression, other types of mental health. We will see the same with some of the eating disorder behaviors. So yes, we can be predisposed genetically, but there are also a number of other factors. So there's the biology component, right? And that is not something we can do or change, as is epigenetics, which means just, you know, I have genetics that are predisposed, and if I am in a certain type of environment and have certain type of experience, they are going to get activated or not activated. And there's not a I'm choosing to do that or not choosing to do that, or as a loved one or a caregiver, I know I'm doing that. So there's certain things we can't control. We are, like we said, needing to do so much more research around that. But what also goes into it is, like we said, there's the social pressure, the social experience that our society creates that we're talking a lot about today, because that is so key for our adolescents at this time in their development, but also impacts us as adults. There's also the kind of emotional and cognitive. So we will see oftentimes that certain personalities are more predisposed to certain types of behaviors. So if we have someone in our life who is that perfectionistic kind of person, who is that person who's like, I gotta always be right, I gotta do it the right way, it has to be perfect. These are kids that we're gonna more likely see predisposed to anxiety, right? Potentially OCD. And these are kids that we're going to see more geared towards probably what we would say the restrictive of like an anorexia or those types of patterns of behavior. What we also see is that sometimes when we have, more intense emotions or complex emotions, so if we have somebody who maybe has more intensity in terms of mood swings or things, that may be lend itself a little bit more to sometimes what we'll see more in that is the binge purge or the kind of back and forth in that way. It's not exact, but there's a little bit of a metaphorical kind of frame. If you think about eating disorders, they're a little bit reflective in terms of like, when somebody's really struggling emotionally and feeling overwhelmed, if we imagine, the idea of binging and purging, that kind of is reflective of that feelings of out of control, that feeling of kind of, feeling overwhelmed. The restriction of everything is so intense, so tight, so constrained is kind of what we imagine when we think of restricting. So personality, temperaments have a huge component as well. So if we know a loved one that is a little bit more leaning in one way, we also know that that's something we have to really help them with. And it's not about like, you can't be restrictive. It's about teaching them they don't have to be perfect. Nobody's perfect, right? We're a work in progress. You do your best. That bee is amazing. I'm so proud of you, and it's understanding the whole picture of that.
I just wanted to add too, I think it's really important to acknowledge the idea of like generational trauma, and how we deal with that. So if we start off with a generation who had initially maybe experienced that particular trauma and it's getting passed down through the lines, the ways in which we cope are also very likely probably transferred through that as well. So just like an additional layer on top of that, not necessarily like a biologically type of inherited thing, but there are patterns. And I think more than anything, I'm recognizing we're coming up against our time, but with that idea and, just kind of generally not necessarily related to trauma, the opportunity that we have to be cycle breakers. And as the parents to these adolescents, being breakers of the way in which things have been, ways that you might have experienced it in your own home life. What a beautiful opportunity that is. And initiating these conversations, making it less taboo and moving forward in a, more healthy place.
Well, this was fascinating. We could certainly talk about this so much more. Obviously, the whole industry around it. There needs to be so much more dialogue about this. I think that because of the complexity, people avoid it. It's so challenging. It's not black and white. It's nuanced, as so many things are that are challenging. But I thank you for your work and thank you for your expertise and for sharing all of it with us tonight. You were wonderful. Thank you all for being here. And this recording, as I said, should be available on our YouTube channel by the end of the week. Thank you, Laura and Haley and Bob and everyone for being here.
Thank you so much for having us.